Hello and welcome to All Important Words, the podcast that helps learners of English master the academic word list. This is Jim.
And Bek, and we've got another interesting and useful academic word to share with you. Jim, what's today's word?
Today's word, Bek, is correspond, which is spelled C-O-R-R-E-S-P-O-N-D. Correspond is a verb in the academic word list.
And as our listeners have already heard, correspond has three syllables, with the stress on the third and final syllable. Correspond, correspond, correspond.
And the meaning of correspond that we want to talk about on this show may not be the one some of our listeners are already familiar with. Some students will know that one meaning of this word is to write letters back and forth with someone.
But that's not the most common meaning in academic English, is it?
No, it's not. In academic English, we usually use the word in other senses, and the most common one is this. If two things or ideas correspond, the parts or information in one relate to the parts or information in the other.
So the parts or information of one thing relate to the parts or information of another thing. That's a little too abstract. We really need an example.
Okay, here's one I'm sure all of us will be able to relate to. For each question, fill in the blank on the answer sheet that corresponds to the letter of the answer you have chosen.
Now the definition makes more sense. Okay, so if we're taking a multiple choice exam, there will be several choices for each question, and you have to fill in the blank on the answer sheet that corresponds to the answer you think is correct.
Right. Each answer in the test booklet corresponds to a blank on the answer sheet. In other words, one is related to the other.
That's a good example, but I have to say, it also kind of stresses me out. I don't like tests.
Ugh, me neither.
Not to change the subject or anything, but I noticed that preposition to in that sentence. Correspond is usually followed by to when we use it with this meaning, right?
That's right, Beck. We can also use the preposition with, but to is much more common. We say something corresponds to something else.
And I've got another example here to illustrate this. The shape of South America's eastern coastline corresponds roughly to the shape of Africa's southwestern coastline.
Great example. This fact is often cited as evidence for the theory of plate tectonics and the notion that all the continents were once connected in one giant landmass. I remember studying this in geology class. But to get back to your sentence, roughly here means what?
It means not exactly. We could say the eastern coastline of South America generally corresponds to the southwestern coastline of Africa. That is to say, one is not an exact match for the other.
It's worth mentioning that correspond roughly and correspond generally are pretty strong collocations in academic English. In other words, roughly and generally often occur together with correspond. In addition, you'll also frequently see the collocations correspond directly, correspond exactly, and correspond closely.
Is that word order fixed, or can we use the adverbs in front of correspond as well?
No, you can definitely put the adverb in front and say roughly correspond, generally correspond, and so on. And here's one more example that includes another of these adverb collocations. In Africa, animal migration periods closely correspond to the wet and dry seasons.
So in other words, the times when animals move from one place to another are closely related to the times when water is available or not available in a particular place.
Exactly. We could also say animal migration patterns correspond closely to patterns of water availability.
Got it. This seems like a useful word.
I think so too. And so it's a bit strange that students don't seem to use it much in their own academic writing. I could hardly find any examples of it in my corpus of student writing when I was preparing for this week's show.
Interesting. So we could say the frequency of this word in general academic English doesn't correspond to its frequency in student writing.
That seems to be true.
Well, maybe now that they know a bit more about this word, they'll feel comfortable using it more often.
I hope so. Anyway, all-stars, that's your academic word list word for the day.
All stars? Is that what you're going to start calling our fans?
Yeah, what do you think? Because, in sports, an all-star is someone who's achieved a high level of ability. And I thought it would be a nice way to encourage our fans to keep improving their abilities with these academic words.
I like it. Okay, all stars. Remember, you can find a lot of great AWL related stuff at our website, allimportantwords.com, including a link to the online version of the Longman Dictionary of Contemporary English, which is where we got the definition used in today's show.
And if you have a question or a comment, or want to suggest an academic word list word for us to cover on an upcoming episode, let us know by using the contact link on our website, or by leaving a comment on our Facebook page at facebook.com/allimportantwords. We'd love to hear from you.
Until our next word, bye!
Bye!